to start with, Carl just likes to have you say your name and.
Thomas Wilson, known as Don Wilson.
Okay.
I live on Steamboat Island. I've been there some 26 years now.
Okay. And Carl also likes to know what you did, what branch of the military you served in.
I served with the Army Air Corps, now the U.S. Air Force. Went into the Air Force, Army Air Corps, in 1940, June 6th, to become an aircraft mechanic. Immediately went to mechanic school and became a mechanic and a crew chief, and a line chief. And when the war started, I applied for and was accepted to become a flying cadet, and had my flying training all in Arizona. And from flight training in 1943, I transitioned into B-26 Marauder combat aircraft at Del Rio, Texas. And from the transition period at Del Rio, I went to Barksdale Air Force Base in Shreveport, Louisiana, where I became a flight instructor. Stayed there for a couple of years. Left there in January of '45 to the European theater and joined the 17th Bomb Group in Dijon, France in January.
Did you get commissioned during this time? Or?
Yes, commissioned upon graduation from flight school in
When
43.
you first flew B-26s, I just read in the WASP page that B-26s, they were hard to learn to fly. Is that true?
They had a very bad reputation because they had some difficult flight characteristics on one engine. And usually an engine was lost on takeoff or shortly after if the engine was going to quit. And it had to be a pretty quick transition to trim the airplane up, feather that dead prop, get the airplane trimmed, and remain in flight. Because at takeoff also usually had the heaviest load on, with armament and fuel. So things were really bad there for a few seconds to get the airplane under control. Unfortunately, a lot of people didn't get it under control, so we had a lot of crashes on takeoff. In fact, I think statistics show that the B-26, there were more deaths in the B-26 in this country than there were in war. Just training in things.
Did you ever lose an engine in your aircraft?
Yeah, but fortunately handled it all right. But I say it had that bad reputation, and just before graduating from flying school, we were all of our graduates, all of us were looking for what kind of airplane we wanted to fly. And they gave us a choice, and if the choice didn't fit the government, of course, they put us where they wanted to. But at Yuma, a few days before graduation, a factory pilot came down to Yuma in a B-26 aircraft and demonstrated it to us, I guess to try to persuade us to want to fly his airplanes. But he did all sorts of fancy maneuvers with it, single engine, he rolled it, things that we don't do with those airplanes, but he did. Nevertheless, we went to Del Rio to train in the airplane. And it had this bad reputation. There was a combat training place in Shreveport, where I went. There was one also in Tampa, Florida. And at Tampa, there was a saying, "One a day in Tampa Bay," from the B-26. And some people called it the flying prostitute because it had no visible means of support. It's a very short, high load. In fact, at that time, it was the highest wing-loaded airplane in the inventory.
Did you ever see one go down?
Oh, yeah. Some crash and burn all over the place.
They're too low to get out of the plane, I take it.
Yeah, or trying to make a survival landing in a field or something with the gear up. And then, of course, in combat, saw a few lost there, burned or exploded in the air with their bombs aboard. But
When the airplane lost an engine, was it automatic what you did to get out of the?
well, it was supposedly automatic what you did to shut that engine down and what they call clean up the airplane, get everything as streamlined as you can.
Do you remember being what you felt like when that happened?
Well, the feather switches for the left and right engine were right up here on the pedestal, right together. I don't know why they didn't put one over here and one over here, but usually it was the co-pilot's job. When the pilot would call for feather, the co-pilot would do the feathering. Mm-hmm. And it was claimed, I don't know, a lot of times the co-pilot got the wrong switch. So if you, of course, and the feathering was really quick. Feather the good engine, with the other one dead, you're in bad, bad trouble. So that was a bad thing about the airplane, but the airplane had fewer combat losses than any other combat aircraft in the inventory. In combat, had the fewest losses.
Why
so
was
that
that?
says something good for it. Well, it was ruggedly built strong, had good engines, very, very good, reliable engines. And the crews that got that far with it knew how to run it once you got there. But the reputation was so bad, when I went to Del Rio, they assigned, I believe, 5 new trainees to one instructor pilot. So our instructor took 5 of us out on the ramp to look at the airplane. And as we walked out there, and he was pointing out this, that feature, and I looked around these other 4 guys, and 3 of them were visibly shaking, just standing there looking at that airplane. And I couldn't believe that. But they were really frightened, just standing there looking at the damn thing. But anyway, it turned out, for most of us who survived it, we liked the airplane a whole lot. Loved it.
How old were you at that point?
I think I was 20 or 21 years old.
Then, but you joined before the war started.
Oh, well, yes. I had, I went in the Air Force when I was just 18.
Did you know that there was going to be a war?
Oh, Lord, no. No. I had no idea of it. No one else did. I was a mechanic. I was happy with that, maintaining airplanes, and I enjoyed that. I was at Moffett Field on December 7, 1941. Moffett is just south of San Francisco on the peninsula, near Sunnyvale and San Jose. And we'd been sent there, we'd been there maybe a month or 2, and we were bringing in recruits into the service, and we were training recruits, trying to. Jimmy Stewart was one of them who came in there. But we didn't train him much, but we shared the stuff with him. But the day the war started, 3 of us were on that Sunday morning. In fact, we were having lunch in, I forgot the name of the town, just off the base. And then we heard on the radio for all military to return to their bases. So we finished lunch and went back to the base. In those days, you didn't have any ID of any kind, proving that you were military. And they had those big iron gates at the guardhouse entering the base. I suppose it hadn't been closed in 40 years, but they were closed now. And the guard, of course, wouldn't let us in until he called back and had our first sergeant come over and identify us and let us back onto the base. And for the rest of the afternoon, we were dropped off at the perimeter of the base with shovels to dig foxholes, because we thought we were going to be invaded. So we dug foxholes, but we didn't have any weapons. The sergeant said, "There's a truck coming from Monterey with the weapons." So before nightfall, there did come a big truck drove up to each foxhole, dumped out a old water-cooled 30 caliber machine gun that we'd never seen before, didn't know how to run it. But it looked awesome. But we didn't have any ammunition. But don't worry, it's coming. And sure enough, in a couple of hours, another truck came by, threw out a box of ammunition, 50 caliber, for the 30 caliber gun. So anyway, we didn't have to shoot at anybody, fortunately.
So what did you talk about when you were sitting in the foxhole?
Well, just wondering how bad this war was going to be, you know, and how a little country like Japan, a bunch of people who didn't know how to do anything, really, couldn't see well, didn't have good eyes, they weren't very big, they were all bow-legged, how they could, thought that they could stage a war against great America.
So did you know, you knew how extensive the damage had been in Pearl Harbor at that point?
No, we were just getting it on the radio like everybody else was getting it. And in our unit was a staff sergeant who had just come from Hickam Air Force Base in Honolulu, and his wife and baby daughter were still there. And he, needless to say, was frightened to death. He was really worried about his family. And I think he heard nothing about them for about a week or 10 days that they were safe. So that was quite a burden for him to bear, worrying about his wife and daughter. And they put her and the baby on a ship and sent them home right away.
You weren't married at this time, right?
Oh, no. Nobody was married then. No.
And your parents were back in Georgia?
Yeah, no, at that time they were living in Texas, yeah. They were living in Texas at that time. No, I left Georgia when I was a 2-year-old.
So was your mom worried about you?
Yeah. Well, I had a brother, 2 brothers in the Marines at that time too, and my mother, of course, was concerned more about them than me, I guess.
She thought that Moffett Field was pretty safe then.
Yeah, of course, she didn't know where Moffett Field was, I guess, or maybe even where California was.
How did she get a hold of you to find out if you're okay? Do you remember?
Oh, no, I don't think she inquired. I think I probably just wrote her. I wrote home every week for all the time that I was in the service.
Were your brothers, they were in the continental United States at that time?
I think one was at Bremerton. The other one, I'm not sure where he was, but he was very shortly Guadalcanal. Maybe he was on his way there. I don't remember how. That's where he was at Pearl Harbor Day. But that was one of the amazing things that you have to give this country credit for. When Roosevelt stood there and said we were going to build 1,000 airplanes a day, and I knew what an airplane was and all it took to build one of those things. I couldn't believe it. Now, that's a dream. Can't build 1,000 airplanes in a day. Well, I think in a year they were doing it, and just marvelous, hard to believe. About a week after Pearl Harbor Day, then, they sent 3 of us. We got orders to go to Bakersfield, California. We were mechanics, and we had a car. We drove to Bakersfield and got there around 10 o'clock at night, inquired about where's the airport, and some all-night service station sent us out on the road. Went out there, and there was a little building smaller than this room with a light on. There was one man in there, and he was an FAA radio operator. And we showed him our order. Where do we report? He said, no place to report. He says, this is the only building out here. Nothing else. Oh, is there another airfield? No, this is the only airfield. It's an emergency airfield. And he's the only guy around. Well, the good old Army screwed up again. So we went back, got a motel. The next morning, got up late, had a late breakfast. Well, we'll go out there and try to sort this out. We got there around 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning. And at that time, there were probably already 200 tents erected with hard backs, with a plywood floor and the walls 4 feet high. And they had a gang of carpenters there putting that stuff together, 2 rows at a time of these tents with a crane between each 2, as they would get the hardback done, the crane would pick this tin up and set it on top like that. Those two cranes. And by nightfall, there must have been 600 tents on that place. All that from morning, from dark to dark, all that. And I just couldn't believe something like that happening. But again, had to be done, and as everything else, I guess.
So when did everybody show up?
Well, then people started coming in. We were the first ones there, and then other people started coming and coming. And we didn't stay there very long. That turned out to be I guess a fueling stop or something for B-24s being flown through Alaska to Russia. And so B-24s were being ferried through there, by the ferry command. We only stayed there a month or two and then went to Victorville, California, and doing some more airplane mechanic work. And then I went to fly airplanes myself.
And that's when you started your training. And
Yeah. Trained at Thunderbird Field in Phoenix, and then had basic training in Arizona, and final training in Yuma.
what was your first choice of an aircraft? You said the B-26 wasn't your first choice.
No, I wanted to fly a P-38, but the government had a funny way of doing that, I since have deduced. They told me I was too big. To fly a fighter, you could only be 5'10" and weigh 160 pounds. But I think they changed that requirement. If they needed more fighter pilots, they'd raise it to 5'11" and 170 or lower it, as to keep the pipeline steady. That's the way they did it. So I hit the pipeline at the wrong time, or right, whichever, and I went to B-26s instead of P-38s.
Was that one of your choices, or is that just what they ended up?
No, that was a choice. That was a choice after the P-38. And
So when you finally became operational, an operational B-26 pilot, then where did you go after that?
well, I'd say I stayed at Barksdale, which was a, let's see, they call it a combat training unit, I believe they call that. And I stayed there as an instructor for, I think, about a year and a half. And then in January '45, went over to France.
So while you were an instructor, did you lose any of your students or anything?
Oh, no. Maybe in the bar, but not in the airplane.
And you instructed on B-26s, or?
Yeah.
So were they all scared when they first got there?
No. By the time they got there, they'd already been through the transition training at another base somewhere.
So they'd already survived?
They'd already survived maybe 60, 100 hours in the airplane, so they were comfortable with it. Yeah.
And the aircraft had what type of engines?
Pratt & Whitney R2800.
They're radial engines?
Yeah, radial, 18-cylinder radials. Good engines.
How big a bomb load could it carry?
I think it carried 2 tons.
And it had a turret on the top?
Had a top turret, a tail gunner, and then 2 waist guns. And the bombardier had a single flexible gun in the nose. And then the pilot had 4 what they call package guns down here on the fuselage, 2 on each side, that were under the pilot's control. But had to be aimed at the whole airplane had to be aimed at the target. They were fixed guns.
So how large a crew did you have on?
6 people. Bomb navigator, co-pilot, radio operator, tail gunner, and engineer, top turret gunner.
So after instructing for a while, did you really want to get into combat?
I wanted to go all the time, and I couldn't go. They kept me there, and I saw all my buddies come through, and they kept going. And they finally turned me loose when they started getting enough people out of combat, rotating them home, and made instructors out of them. So finally they got one, a veteran, and so I could go take his place over there. So that's the way that worked.
So when you finally were sent over to Europe, you had your crew, your full crew with you.
Yeah.
When you were sent?
Yeah. Took the crew over, and we had the privilege of riding a ship overseas. Probably the worst or second worst voyage I ever had in my life. And an English ship, the New Mauritania. And that captain, I hope he's roasting in hell. And I suppose they're all that way, especially the British captains. But the food on that thing was terrible. It was awful. Wintertime on Atlantic, no escort. They said this ship could outrun any submarine. Weren't concerned with that. I was more concerned with the food. But a white plate for breakfast now. You get a white cold plate, and they put on that a square piece of white fish with a white sauce on top of that. And the whole damn thing is cold for breakfast out in the cold Atlantic. And then about 15 minutes later, they make an announcement, all hands on deck, clean sweep fore and aft. So everybody had to get out and up on the decks and try to find a place out of the cold and sleet and wind to hide. First cold I ever had in my life, I got on that damn ship and went directly off that ship into a dispensary in England.
So the captain treated you like part of the crew of the ship then?
Treated everybody that way. Now the officers, I think I shared a cabin with 3 other officers, but all our enlisted men were down in the hold. So I went down to visit them, and they were just in there like cattle. And people vomiting, steel decks, and vomiting all, hell, it was dangerous to walk in there. And the latrine in that thing was up in the bow with a trough over here and a trough over here with water running through, and all this slime on the floor, and people trying to stand there and urinate into this damn trough, half of it going in the trough and half on the deck. It was miserable anyway, and it stunk down there. God, it did stink. No ventilation. So I told my crew, I said, you guys come up here to my cabin in the daytime. You come up here and stay, and I want you to stay in this cabin. Get out of that damn hole down there. Terrible.
So it was a cargo ship, was it, that was converted to?
No, it was a passenger liner. Passenger liner converted to troops. New Mauritania. Hope that thing's at the bottom of the ocean somewhere now.
Was it a British merchant crew on it, or?
Yeah, British were crewing it. Yeah.
Did you ever talk to the captain?
No. Oh God, no. Lieutenant doesn't talk to a captain.
He never come down off the bridge to see?
No, I think he never left his stateroom. No. Anyway, I was happy to get off that thing and went into a dispensary. And the dispensary was just as cold as the ship. I didn't like being in England much.
So was that where you operated out of, was England, or?
No. I stayed there, got out of the dispensary in 4 or 5 days, and they shipped me over to France. But
So you never got to see any of England besides the dispensary then?
Oh, I did get an opportunity to go out to Stoke-on-Trent, I believe is the name of the place. Stoke-on-Trent. And nearby there is Wedgwood China factory, where they make Wedgwood. I went out and visited there, enjoyed that. And one night in town, I had a vendor selling fish and chips, and kind of liked that. That was hot food. So I took an order of fish and chips in one, fish here, in my top coat pocket. So I get back into that cold room. I could eat that stuff before I went to bed. I got back in that cold room, turned the light. I couldn't wait to get out. Opened it up, and all that stuff was just solid lard. Just congealed lard. Terribly appetizing.
So while you were there in dispensary, your crew was there with you also?
Yeah, they stayed around waiting for me to get out. In fact, I think one of them was sick too. So anyway, from there we went on over to France to Dijon, France, the home of the Mustard family. And there we lived in tents, which was kind of an interesting thing. When our adjutant, our unit had moved up there from Sardinia, Corsica, I forgot which. And our adjutant, Jack, came up there ahead of the unit to make sure the airfield was ready, and because they were all shot up. But anyway, he went up there to take care of billeting matters and those kind of things. And he had a French lieutenant with him, English speaking. And they were driving along towards the chateau, and Jack looked over to the side here and he saw a whole bunch of tin shacks, and it looked like a no man's land or something down in there. And he asked the lieutenant, he says, what is that all over there? And the Frenchman said, oh, that's a mustard thing. He said, well, let's stop. But when we get the troops here, we're going to need mustard. So they did. And so Jack said, well, here on the 15th or whatever, bring us some mustard out, and we'll be at the chateau down here. So you bring mustard. And the farmer said, all right. And sure enough, that day he showed up in a horse and a two-wheel cart, and he had two 50-gallon drums on that cart of mustard. And Jack told him he thought that was quite enough. But Jack takes credit for starting that Poop on Gray mustard company up again. But we, in the chateau, some count's chateau, we put our headquarters in there, and the majors slept in there.
You weren't sleeping in the chateau?
No, we were sleeping out in the grounds where we had our tents set up, and we had little pot-belly stoves in there. I don't know if you've ever seen one of these, but they're really unique little stoves, and good little stoves. So we all get a gasoline can, drum, or something, set it outside on a rack, steal a piece of copper quarter-inch tubing from the flight mechanics, and put a valve on it and run it into the stove, put some bricks in the stove, and then burn that 120 octane fuel in that little stove. You know. Oh man, that thing just turned red hot. It was a really good stove.
So you finally got warm then? Huh?
Oh yeah. And the sidewalks down the tent row, they put 2x4s up there to contain the aggregate. The aggregate they didn't have, so they used 9mm captured German ammunition. Just filled the trough with that, and that's what we walked on. That was our gravel. Live ammunition.
Rounds, huh?
Yeah, 9mm stuff. It had to be used for something. Anyway, once in a while somebody'd get too much cognac. The other guys in the tent asleep. On the way in the tent, he'd pick up a handful of that gravel, drop it in the little pot-belly stove. And the little stove would just sit there and vibrate, pop, bang, bang, just to wake up the tent mates.
You got there before the aircraft got there, or?
No, we didn't take our aircraft. The unit was all full of aircraft.
So they were coming up from through North Africa.
Yeah, they came on up, but they were getting replacement airplanes as they needed.
So did you get a new aircraft when it showed up, or did you get a?
No. In fact, I never flew the same airplane just by chance. This whichever one they assigned to. Nobody had their own airplane. Just flew whichever was they want to assign you to.
So how old was the airplane that you flew in first? You remember?
Oh, I suppose the newest I flew was maybe had 100 hours on. Yeah. The oldest probably had 1,500 hours. And I remember one, I got stuck with that one 2 or 3 times. It was just a war-weary airplane. The only way to get it airborne is to pull the gear up on it. Get to the end of the runway as fast as you can get there, and then just pull the gear up, and then it would fly. But I think that thing could have run forever if you'd left the gear. I never would have got off the ground. It was just a tired airplane. Sick airplane.
Pretty shot up, was it, and repaired?
No, I don't know what all was wrong with it, but I guess from hard landings and so forth, they'd get out of alignment maybe or something. I don't know what. And weak engines after a certain wear. Engines wouldn't put out 100% power.
So after you got stationed over Dijon, when was your first combat? Do you remember that?
I don't remember what day it was, but I wasn't there long till they took all the pilots and made them ride co-pilot with another guy for 1 or 2 missions, and I guess just to look at the scenery or whatever.
How many days after D-Day were you there? Was it quite a while, or?
Oh, well, D-Day had already occurred. So that went on in 44.
So it was quite a while after that.
After D-Day, yeah. France was already liberated when I got there.
And how close was Dijon to the enemy units? No?
Was the enemy, you say?
Yeah, how many nautical miles?
Oh, we were probably 50 miles from the front lines, I would guess. Yeah, probably 50 miles.
So did the Luftwaffe ever launch any raids against your air base?
No, nothing against the airfield. No, they were, I think at that time, expending everything they could toward bombers, trying to beat the bombers back.
So when you took off, how many knots did your B-26 travel at cruising?
About 160.
So that didn't take you very long to cover 50 miles?
No. Our missions were usually 3 hours, I'd say. Once, I think 2 or 3 times it got up to 4 hours, but usually about 3.5 hours.
Do you remember the first mission when you went into combat? Do you remember the whole mission, or is it not?
No, not. I don't recall anything significant happening, and just busy trying to keep the airplane in formation is all. And I say that time we had a little bit of flak, but not very much. And I'd say the worst thing were those fighters when they found us.
Were they? Your ceiling, where you'd be above the fighters, or would they be above you when they saw you, or?
Well, on this particular mission, on the 23rd of April, we were always briefed on what to be expected in the way of flak. Intelligence gave us that briefing: how many guns, this location, how many here, and whether we expected fighters or not. I don't know. They didn't know that anyway. But they would tell us what our fighter cover was, protection. In this case, they told us, I think we had 50 close support, which means fighters right and with us, near us, and something like 150 area support. Well, I never did figure out what the hell area was. I guess somewhere over Germany. I don't know what it meant. But they were P-47s supporting us down there. And
so first thing you encountered would have been flak then on that mission?
Yeah, flak. And
is that the first time you ever flown through flak? And
I've never flown through flak before, and it was not. I didn't think much of it because I never got anything really close. We had a procedure. We had 3 airplanes full of what they call window, which was a tinfoil strip about 1 foot long, 1 or 2 inches wide. And these window ships would go down ahead of us 2 or 3 minutes, and the crew would kick this stuff out, bundles of this, and break up and filter down. And the German radar then would fix on that window instead of us. So the first, we flew over in 4, what we call flights, I guess, boxes. So the first flight over after the window ships, he was in good shape because the flak was breaking way down there. And the second one, he was pretty good. Well, the third one, maybe 1 or 2 was getting through, and the fourth one, they were all getting through by the time the 4th flight got over. So you didn't like to be in the 4th flight, and sure as hell didn't want to be on that window crew, because that window crew didn't have any protection. So we didn't get a great deal of flak, and I think thankful for that crew.
Was that a bombing run that you're on, or?
Yeah. But, and that little dog that I had the picture of there, I took her with me one day, when we got a lot of flak. And she'd, a lot of times, just sit up in my lap and look out, see what's going on. And we got on the bomb run, got the doors open, and that bomb run lasted for about 3 minutes or 4, nice and steady. And I was busy trying to stay in formation. That little dog would jump up and look out and then leave, and I didn't pay much attention. But during that 3 or 4 minutes, she jumped in and out of my lap 3 or 4 times. After we got on the ground, the tail gunner told me that that dog came back to his place 3 times during that bomb run with the doors open. We had a catwalk that wide through the bomb bay door. But she came back there 3 times and looked out. And she'd see it and she'd leave again.
Right out front.
And strangely, though, that dog, when I got her on the ground, she was just trembling. She was really scared, really scared. And I can't imagine how an animal could sense that. You know, a human could sense that there's unfriendly stuff out there, but how that dog could sense it, maybe smell it or something, I don't know. But I didn't take her anymore with me after that. I made her stay home.
So when you're on that 3-minute bomb run, the bombardier didn't take over control of the aircraft?
Well, no. We had the lead bombardier in the whole flight. He would take over his air. Then everybody else was flying on him, and we had what's called a toggle. Our bombardier, as soon as they see his bombs, he just toggle on the other. Call him a toggle.
So everybody in your box?
Yeah, everybody just drop at one time with one bombardier aiming.
So when you got into a bomb run and you were committed to do it, you never veered from your bomb run.
No.
You just toughed it out for
Yeah.
Was that a long 3 or 4 minutes to fly?
Oh yeah. It was long. You're hoping to hurry up and get out of there. But I don't know. I just never got too concerned about the flak because I never got close to it.
Did you ever see anybody off in your box? Did you ever watch them go down in a?
Yeah, not from flak, but from the fighters.
Fighters.
Yeah, not the flak though.
So when you're going in the bomb run and the flak was coming up and you're scanning the sky for fighters, I take it.
No, I scan nothing but the airplane I'm flying off his wing.
So your crew's watching.
Yeah, the crew's out watching for that. No, I just the pilot's just busy watching that other airplane, so he doesn't bump wings or something.
So you probably don't even see where your bombs hit target then.
Oh no.
They high altitude drops or?
Well, we dropped it usually about 10,000 feet, which is well within range of all the anti-aircraft fire.
Is that lower than the B-17?
Oh yeah. 17s, they dropped around 20,000, twice that high. But we went in lower. And our targets were usually transportation hubs, railroad yards, ammunition depots, fuel dumps, bridges, those kind of things. We didn't bomb factories like the 8th Air Force did.
So when you're on a bomb run, and I take it everybody's on the intercom, and was there a lot of talk?
Ordinarily not. No, we didn't talk a lot on the air.
Just business.
Yeah. In fact, the bombardier that I carried overseas with me, I think I flew maybe 2 or 3 missions with him, but he was a very excitable guy, very excitable. And he'd just get on an intercom and just jabber, you know. It's flak, and yeah, sure enough, 3 or 4 miles over there, he sees flak, and he's yelling about it. So after 3 or 4 missions, I talked to him, and I said, you just stay off of that intercom. We need that for other stuff. But he'd get real excited. And so I told the ops officer I want a new bombardier. I fired him, and I got another one.
So did he go to another crew after that?
Yeah, and the story with that, he's also the navigator, bombardier navigator. Mm-hmm. So they gave him to another guy who had just promoted from a co-pilot to a pilot. And we were flying, of all places, flying from eastern France to western France to the city of Bordeaux. And there was an enclave of Germans in this Bordeaux port. And the Army was down there, and they couldn't roust these Germans out. So they called for air support. So we get ginned up to go over there and bomb those Germans out of the town of Bordeaux. And all this over friendly territory, all the way over there. And I think our target area was not much bigger than Olympia. And anyway, Harry, this bombardier they put with that other crew, on the way over there, they lost an engine. So this green pilot asked Harry to give him a heading to a airfield. Well, from 10,000 feet at that time in France, you could look out any direction probably and see an airfield. So Harry gave him a heading to fly, so many minutes, so he flew that out. There's no airfield there. All the time, they still got those bombs on, and they're going down. They're losing altitude. That airplane could not maintain altitude with a full load on one engine. It was going down. So Harry gave him another heading. So he goes off this direction. He couldn't find an airfield. And I say, they were all over the place. Well, they ended up landing that airplane, wheels up in a field. And the nose went into a hedgerow. And Harry, for God's sake, is still up in that glass nose. He didn't even get out of it for the crash landing. He's still in there. Well, Harry had kind of a long nose anyway, and the best part was that plexiglass broke and cut a piece of it off. So he got a new nose out of the thing. But he couldn't find an airfield for that pilot. Well, all the crew came out of it all right. Then some Frenchmen gathered around from the villages, and they got up to the drain cocks on the airplane and drained the gas out and sold it to these Frenchmen for whatever purpose they wanted. Well, the French took them into town and kept them in there a day or two with the best hotel in town, the best food, and booze, cognac. Then they got ready to leave, and the mayor came to him and handed him a bill. And the bill was, well, for the hotel and the food and everything. Gave him a bill for it. So I think Harry and the pilot negotiated some way with that gasoline and got out of paying the bill to those Frenchmen.
So they dropped their bomb though before they...
No, they never salvoed the bombs and carried them to the ground with them.
Well, you're supposed to drop them when you got problems, aren't you?
Oh yeah, first thing. And Harry stayed up in that glass nose all by himself and couldn't find an airfield. Anyway, I don't think Harry flew anymore after that. I believe they left him on the ground until his nose got healed anyway.
And when you were, what was the first time that you really felt any fear when you're...
I can't say I felt any fear.
Too busy doing what you were doing? And...
Yeah, I didn't have sense enough, I guess, or too busy, working the problems. I think that's sort of a godsend in a way that you do get busy and feel sorry, maybe for the other guys, like the co-pilot. He sits there and he has nothing to do. Except,
what about your gunners, Dave?
Well, I guess I don't know if they were bothered by it much or not, but they had a job to do, at least to look around. And
so that would have been your first indication that a fighter was approaching, probably was a gunner would spot them. And...
Well, no, in that one case where Gallen got shot down, we had been briefed on this mission. In fact, to begin with, we had been near this base where those German fighters were, been passed there the day before bombing.
You're talking about the ME-262,
yeah,
the jet?
Yeah. We'd been bombing a ammunition depot down in Munich, near Munich. And on the way home, they had those K2 cameras back in the waist gun. These guys in the waist, photographers, they just take pictures of everything out the window, on the ground, everything. Just use up that film. Well, then developed that film that night and had pictures of this airfield we flew right over with these fighters on it, the jets. So during the night, the intelligence people say, well, we'll go bomb those tomorrow. So they've filled the first 30 of our airplanes, they loaded up with fragmentation bombs, And the next 30, they loaded up with incendiaries. So we're going to blow those airplanes, shatter them up, and then burn them. So we headed for that location, for that airfield. And we came upon some clouds and kept climbing and climbing, get over those clouds. And I think it was maybe a 7/10 coverage or something, pretty high cumulus. And suddenly the formation makes a hard turn to the left, and I glance out, well, more clouds, and I figure the formation leader's just trying to avoid those clouds. And during this turn, I felt a little bump. And I thought, well, that's prop wash from somebody, and I've got a wing in somebody's prop wash. Then I felt another bump. Then I heard somebody yell, flak. Then I saw a burst of flak out here. And we weren't yet to what we call the bomb line, where we, when we start on the bomb run, we put on our helmets. Well, I didn't have my helmet on yet. It was sitting down here on the floor. So when whoever it was yelled flak, that co-pilot grabbed that helmet and slammed it on my head right down to here. And we're in this big turn. But I got rid of that. But in the meantime, my windshield defrosters weren't working. Everything was frosted up. And I had a little hole about this big that I was keeping clean with my hand. That's all I could see. Just enough to see that airplane to fly on his wing. And of course they yelled flak, there's a helmet. And then somebody yelled fighters. And that's what it was, those 7 ME-262s.
So it wasn't flak then?
Well, no, they were firing
enemies.
20 millimeter cannon. Yeah, it was flak, but from their cannon instead. But I guess from people who were observing the thing said those airplanes came off. They came from that airfield we were going to, but they came off. And Gallen said this in his book. They took off, and they were always after us for some reason. But they came up past us, turned around, and came in on our tail, right level flight with us. And I didn't get to see much of the whole thing. Our fighters, the P-47 pilots, said that they could keep up with one of those jets as long as they were going down. They could stay with him. But those jets would fly through and fire, and P-47s chasing them. They'd go way out here somewhere, the 47s, and then they'd turn around and beat the 47s back to the formation again. But through my little hole, I saw one jet go through the formation like that, and on each wing was a P-47. And that's what the fighters call, they had him boxed. Any way he turns, he's going to be in front of one of their guns, either this one or that one, if they can stay up with him. But they claimed they could, and I don't know if they got him or not, but that's all I saw the whole thing, was 3 going that way.
That was your first encounter with the 262?
Yeah. And that was the end of the 262s. They were finished then.
Really?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's when Gallen got shot down that day, and all his 6 buddies.
So one of your group shot him down then?
Well, no, one of our fighter escort.
Fighter cover.
Yeah, a fighter pilot from San Francisco. Yeah.
So you'd been briefed on the 262s before? Though.
Oh, yeah. And we could see the contrails way out there somewhere. We could see them. Our airplanes weren't making, and just one contrail, too, and we never had one airplane operating like that. Then we saw the contrails, but never saw the airplane of that 263, I believe it was, that little rocket ship they had.
No, the Comet?
Comet, yeah. Well, that was a one-pass airplane only, and they were after the B-17s. They didn't bother us.
So was that that wasn't your first encounter with German aircraft, though?
That was the only, first and only. Yeah.
The first and only was the 262.
Yeah.
Never any prop driven.
No, never saw prop driven.
Well, that's quite an encounter then.
Well, that was enough. but let's say when we got back on the ground and debriefed, they shot down 3 of our B-26s, and our gunners claimed 3 of them, and our fighters claimed 4. That was at the debrief. But in Gallen's book, he had different numbers altogether. And that's why I wrote him and criticized his book, and he answered me back, and I was wrong, Lieutenant.
Did was that pretty much the end of the 262s?
Yeah, that was the last flight ever of a 262. In fact, when the war ended, I think in the month of June, I believe it was June, my outfit moved to that base, which is called Schleißheim on the north outskirts of Munich. We moved there, and here were all these wrecked airplanes all around the place.
So you actually got to see one up close.
Oh yeah. In fact, I tried to shoot through the windshield of one of them on my 45, but it just bounced off. That windshield's about 2-3 inches thick.
That plexiglass, was it, or?
I don't know what kind of glass, but of course it was an angle like that, and I'm standing on the ground, 30 feet away, and there was a lot of wrecked ones around on the airfield there, beat up.
Then there's still, so when you moved up there, then the war was still on, right?
When we moved into Schleißheim, no, the war's ended. It's June then. Yeah, the war was over. Yeah, June or July we moved down there.
Do you still to keep in touch with your crew?
Only my engineer lives down in Florida, where he always lived. And that bombardier, Harry, he's from San Francisco, Menlo Park, and I've seen him a couple of times. That's the only one. I think the radio operator has long since died. Never could find the co-pilot. Don't know what happened to him. So, and the tail gunner I think he went crazy or something. He lived in Chicago. Those people are kind of funny anyway.
So have you been back to Europe since the war has ended?
Well, yeah, I went back there and flew on the Berlin airlift. And then when that ended, I went back again in 1951 to 54 and was stationed there with a radar outfit on the west side of the Rhine in the French zone.
So was there any time at all that you were scared that were flying B-26s?
I really can't say that I was ever frightened of.
Not even when that engine went out, huh?
No.
Too busy feathering that.
Yeah. I don't. I never had any real strange things happen in that airplane. I know at Barksdale one time I took an airplane off with a training crew, and the trim tab, as you gain speed, you got to roll the trim tab forward to keep the nose down, and of course as you slow down then, reduce speed for landing, you nose up. Well, the trim tab was frozen. It wouldn't pull the nose up. So I put it forward a little bit, and it stuck there and wouldn't come back. Every time it'd go forward, it would not go back to its original position. And I couldn't figure anyway. I just went around the traffic pattern and landed, and the co-pilot and I both had to, without trim tab, had to hold the stick back to land the airplane. It took both of us to do it. And I took the airplane over and turned it in. There's something wrong with that trim tab. And I guess the ground crews came out and checked it out. Well, as soon as we got on the ground, too, I rolled it, and hell, it worked good, sitting on the ground. But I turned it in and wrote it up as something bad wrong with it. And that afternoon, they put another crew in that airplane, and they went out with it and crashed it about 6 miles from the base. And it must have been something that when the forces on the aircraft are on the wings instead of the landing gear, that something was binding that trim tab. But they had the same problem with it. I said but they chose to put it in the field out there instead. But I never had any problem with the airplane. Just treated me real good.
When you got stationed over in Dijon, did you lose a lot of B-26s after that, or?
No, we had a few. Had some. Yeah, occasionally we'd lose one. he'd get shot and have to go down or limp home or something. There's one guy, the name was Sarles, the sorriest officer you ever saw in your life. He didn't know how to wear a uniform. He didn't know how to salute. He didn't know anything. Sarles. He drank quite a bit too. And in fact, but he was a flight leader. Sometimes he'd been through a lot of them, but he'd get on an airplane with a hangover. Boy, he'd fly steady though. He was the easiest one of all to follow. He was really good. I liked to fly on his wing. Old Sarles. Sarles had been down through southern France. He'd been in the outfit a long while. And the anti-aircraft gunners in southern France had shot down several of our B-26s. When we got up there to Dijon, we had a lot of prisoners working around the camp, cleaning up stuff and cooking and doing whatever. And they wore white coveralls. And there was a big red-headed German there that Sarles somewhere or another figured out that this red-headed German had been an anti-aircraft gunner down at Marseille, France, and was responsible for some of the havoc raised there. So Sarles would get drunk and go get his .45 and start looking for that big German. and he'd find him there somewhere and put that .45 up in his nose like that and start cussing him. Well, the poor German would just sweat. You know, he knew any time that drunk was going to pull the trigger, he'd have the hammer back on that .45. And we was egging him on. Oh, go ahead, Sarles, pull it, Sarles. And that German, I know he never slept a good night since that time. For that fool American there going to blow his head off with that .45. Sarles is funny. But anyway, he got shot down, and he bailed out and landed in a muddy plowed field or something. And he wasn't quite sure if he was on the American side or the German side. And he wasn't quite sure where he was, but he had a camera with. So he got out of the harness, and he starts through this mud over to a nearby road, and he remembered this camera. He's got pictures in there, and he don't dare let those Germans get the pictures. So he took the film out and stomped them into the mud. Then he goes on and got right up near this road, and an American Jeep came by. And he's on the right side. So he went back to get his film and his camera out of the mud, and he's out there picking that up, and another Jeep came by and said, "Hey," he said, "get out of there. That place is a minefield out there." So Sarles he took about 4 steps back to that road and abandoned his camera and film in the mud. Anyway, they took him to an Army hospital over there, dispensary. I think he had a couple little chips or something. So didn't even get a stitch, but the Army gave him a Purple Heart there. Then he got back to our outfit, and he got back to us in about a week, and our outfit gave him another Purple Heart. For all the same thing. But when a guy got shot down over there, a premium possession was blankets, GI blankets. We slept on those cots, canvas cots, and would get as many blankets as you could underneath and put your sleeping bag on top of that. So some people had 6, 8 blankets there, you know. So when a guy got shot down, it was a race back to his tent to grab his stuff. You get his liquor, you get his cigarettes, and get those blankets. And if his uniforms fit, you get them. Somebody's got to have them. Well, Sarles came back, and he had nothing left after a week, and he was raising hell around there. He said, "You bunch of vultures." But of course, he had done the same thing. That's why he had 8 blankets. He'd been doing the same thing.
So did you ever have anybody that didn't come back that you knew real well, or?
That did not?
Yeah.
I don't believe so. No. One of our other fellow, Hildebrand was his name, he got shot down toward the end of the war, and he bailed out and was captured by a German medical unit, battalion or something. And that battalion was retreating, so the colonel in charge of that battalion, the German colonel, took him as a personal hostage, prisoner. And they went up into the Bavarian woods somewhere, Austrian Alps, somewhere up there, where that colonel had his battalion. But he had every meal with that colonel, that commander. So he ate just like that colonel did, and had no guard on him or anything. And one day up there in the woods, that colonel told him, said, "Hey," said, "you go right down here a ways, take my fishing tackle, and go down there and see if you can catch some trout for supper." So Hildred goes down there and fishes 2 or 3 hours and got some trout and brought them back. Had the German cook cooked them up for him. And a few days later, he said, "Take my Mauser rifle, get us a deer." So he went down there and he said, hell, he had 3 rounds of ammunition and a gun, and Switzerland wasn't too far away. He says, hell, I'm leaving. I got a weapon, now I'm gonna head for the border. Then he thought some more, and he said, Christ, that's dumb. I'm being treated, I'm eating with the commander here. Hell, I eat better here than I do at home. I better stay here, and he did. He stayed there. But he said he had a good time there with the Germans, eating well. Then a few days, an American column came through, so the colonel took his prisoner and went down and met with a white flag and met the American column and turned his prisoner over. Yeah.
So when you had combat losses and you got back and part of your box had gone down, or how did that affect people on that base?
I'm not sure.
Did you
Really thought a hell of a lot about it. I don't know why. Isn't that strange?
This one Wehrmacht soldier that we talked to, he, in his book, said that after having gotten to the Russian front, that a non-commissioned officer had said something to him about death and the war and their situation, and that he just figured what would happen, and that he wasn't going to worry.
Well, I never thought the process through to that degree. I just, I don't know. I suppose every 21-year-old feels the same way. You know, he's nothing can happen to you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like you see these guys out here on their motorcycles and fast cars and stuff. You know, it happens to somebody else, but it never happened to me. And I never had any idea that I would ever get hurt in that war. Never did. No idea. Other guys would, but not me. I guess that's a survival instinct or something, huh? I don't know.
So when you flew into Berlin, the airlift, what were you flying? You weren't flying your B-26?
No, that was a commercial DC-4 or Air Force C-54, 4-engine transport.
And flying into what, Tempelhof? Or
No, we flew into a French field called Gatow on the west outskirts of Berlin. And I was on a British base up near Hanover in the British zone. And we flew, let's see, I think we were about an hour into Berlin and an hour, 15 minutes back. And we flew 2 trips a day.
what did you think about those flights and the purpose behind them?
Oh, I liked it. I enjoyed it because it was all precision and all just clockwork, and I felt I was doing something good and something unusual. I think we were landing an airplane about every minute, or maybe 2 minutes. I don't remember just what it was, but I know the guy on the other end of the runway, he would just be off the runway when we were landing on this end, so it was pretty fast.
Then a fast unload and...
Yeah, we never shut the engines off to unload. We flew coal, just coal. I think 100-pound sacks of coal, and had all the windows taken out in the cargo area. All those windows were out, cold.
Why did they take the windows out?
For ventilation.
In case of explosion, the coal
Yeah,
dust?
well, that coal dust would filter through, and in the belly of the airplanes, when they'd go overhaul these airplanes at the depot, they found as much as a ton of coal dust in the belly of these airplanes. And that stuff is like gunpowder, you know, very volatile. So anyway, it was cold, and I think we flew into Berlin at something like 2,500 feet and out at 3,500, never any high altitude, but night, day, all kinds of weather.
So that anybody is supplying an old enemy with at that point?
Oh, no, didn't even think about it. We were more concerned with the Russians then, because the Russians were, you know, they'd come and harass us once in a while, just fly along beside or something, but not.
Never take a shot at it?
Oh, no. No, I enjoyed flying at airlift, though. We landed at airplane, didn't know we were on the ground till we felt it. Fly it right to the ground. And I'm not sure they do that now even.
So you come in real fast then?
No, just normal speed. But
Normal speed.
we had, I'll say that one good thing about the Brits, we had the British radar ground control units, GCAs, and they were handling our landings, and they did a good job of it. That lead us right to the ground. And calm, never raise it.
Dad, back to the Dijon, France. Do you remember what one of your fondest days was, being there in Dijon, flying missions? Is there something that really sticks out as being a day that you were?
Well, yeah, most of the time we didn't have very good weather, but one that was, in fact, it was Easter Sunday. On Easter Sunday, beautiful day, a lot of sun out. We'd had our briefings. We were out there, just out there by the airplanes, just waiting for the armament people to get them armed and get them fueled up. And sitting on the bombs, in fact, and had some chalk and wrote messages to Adolf on the bombs, and then later that Easter day went over and dropped them, I think on Heidelberg, I believe, the rail yards in Heidelberg that day. And we had a couple more things over there that I found interesting. In 1947 or 8, I was in Air Force school down in Florida with 200-300 more students, and had a colonel up there to speak. The subject was communication. And he had a big map on the wall with a butcher paper on it. He peeled that off, and there's a map of Europe, and I looked at France, Germany, the bomb line, which was always shown there in red. And God, that looks, then he had a route on there. That looks familiar. And his lecture that day was on the the failure of communication, and my unit was involved in that. The 8th Air Force had been in Schweinfurt, Germany, which was the ball bearing capital of Germany. All the ball bearings made there. So our strategy sessions in Washington decided to stop all the rolling stock in Germany. We get rid of their ball bearings. That'll stop everything. So they had these 1,000 B-17 missions, 2 or 3 of them, to Schweinfurt to destroy the Schweinfurt ball bearing factories. And the poor B-17s got shot all to pieces over there. Lost a lot of, sometimes high as 10% or more losses. Well, what, a year or 2 years after, the German army was retreating through Schweinfurt, Patton's army that in front of them, and the army calls for air support. So that's us. So during the night, we get bombed up to go over there in the morning and bomb those Germans' army out of Schweinfurt. So we went there and dropped our bombs and went back and got debriefed. And boy, we did more damage on that one mission than the 8th Air Force did in all the missions they flew over. There were 1,000 airplanes. Well, we'll just do it again. So bombed up the airplane, went back that afternoon and unloaded another salvo on Schweinfurt. And we got a presidential citation for that mission. It was really great. Anyway, these years hence, this colonel is telling us what really happened. The Army, sure enough, called for air support. But before all that could happen, they had driven the German Army out of Schweinfurt, completely through town, but they knew we were coming. They couldn't stop us, so they retreated so we could bomb the town. So we bombed it. Then they took it again. But again, we were coming. So they had to take that town 3 times so we could bomb it and get a presidential citation. But if that isn't a ridiculous thing you ever heard of, God, we thought we were doing good. And those soldiers down there on the ground, those just cussing, had to get out of town so we could drop bombs on them. Jesus.
You know, when you look at everything that the war and everything that's been written about it and televised, you think there's anything that's been left out of the common history of the war?
No, I believe not, but since this series is being done for education purposes, I would like to comment on those concentration camps in Germany. I had, I'd say a month after the war, I believe it was, we moved into near Munich, and about 10 miles from our base down there was that concentration camp of Dachau. So we had heard a little about it, so well, we'll go over there and look at it. So we went over there, and at this time, Patton's army, his soldiers, had taken these SS German troopers and had them behind the barbed wire. And the SS guys, you know, they were the supermen. They were lounging around on the ground in there, and we were outside the fence laughing at them. We had our 45s on our hips. They didn't have anything. And besides, they were in the wire now. But we went through there, through those storerooms there, oh, hell, larger than this, a lot larger, white walls, and their shoe print, heel mark prints, 6 feet high in there, where they had stored these bodies, just thrown them into that room. Just terrible. And where they burned these bodies out there. There was a tree with a limb hanging, convenient limb up here, that big. And the rope mark in that thing where they'd been hanging them was cut into that tree of a half inch or more, into that big limb from a rope mark. And the walls where they'd stood them up there to shoot them, all these marks in the wall yet, you know, and dried blood still there. And it's just amazing that people could do that to people. And I find it appalling now that there are people, including some in Germany, that say this thing never happened. Just terrible.
Did you meet any of the Dachau survivors when you were there?
No, I didn't. All the survivors are long gone. But our Army troops who were guarding these prisoners, of course, those GIs, they'd been fighting through Africa and Italy and France and been fighting those Germans for a long time. And it looked to me like Patton had personally picked each one of these guards because they were big guys, big GIs. And they backed a truck up at the end of the day, backed the truck up to the gate that had these guys out in the woods cutting wood, the prisoners. And had a line of GIs here and a line here. These prisoners jump off the truck and walking into the gate. And this one GI reached out and grabbed a German by the collar and picked him up like you would a kid and set him down here. And didn't say a word, and the German reached in his pocket, brought out some tobacco, and put it in the guard's hand. The guard picked him up, put him back in. No word ever spoken by anybody. But the guard knew what he wanted. He wanted that tobacco, and they weren't allowed to have any. I asked one of the guards, I said, these supermen ever give you any trouble? He said, oh, sometimes they try to, out there in the woods, and they get smart ass. I said, well, what do you do? Well, we just have them pick up a log and hold it over their head. For how long? said, till they fall. And I thought, sounds good to me. I spoke with some of the German people around that neighborhood, though, 10 miles away, and asked them, did they know about going over there? And they said they didn't know what, they knew something was there, but they didn't know what it was. And I had to believe them, that they did not know what was going on over there. Of course, they knew something was there.
Did you walk through the barracks at Dachau and see the bunks and all that?
No. I didn't go where the sleeping quarters, just where they were killing them and burning them and getting rid of them. But during the last months of the war, they didn't have any fuel to burn the bodies with, and that's why they just stacked them up like cordwood. They had no way of getting rid of them, so they just stacked them.
I was in a small concentration camp in Belgium in the 70s, and originally it was a Belgium prison that was completely underground, and the Germans had the prisoners remove 250 million, I think it was 250 million cubic yards of soil to uncover it. And I walked through there, and even that many years after the war, there was this feeling
Yeah.
like it was a tangible thing. Did you feel anything like that when you were in Dachau? And those?
No, and in fact, I went down there some years later with my wife. I went through there again. But it'd been cleaned up a little bit in those years, but I think that those rooms with the footprints up on the wall are still there. I believe that was a. I think it's important the world never forget that, and I think it's important too that the world never forget that there weren't just Jews there. People seem to think on account of the Holocaust it was a Jewish problem. It wasn't just Jews. It was a lot of German Protestants were in there, if they were, on the opposite side of the regime, and a lot of Polish, and all kinds of people other than Jews. But the Jews would have you think that it was only Jews that were exterminated in there, but they weren't. There were all kinds of folks.
When you were back before the concentration camp, back at base or on a long flight to a bombing run, was it sometimes tedious and monotonous?
Oh, no.
Never?
No.
What about if you were did bad weather ever keep you on the ground?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Sitting in your tent and it was raining and
Oh, yeah. Snow. Yeah.
what did you do to break the monotony then?
Well, played a lot of cards, gambled quite a bit. And in France, France is known for its cognac, and so we shared that with them quite a bit. And if you ever...
Did you ever meet any French girls from the villages around there?
Yeah, had to. The French men were gone. Somebody had to step in. It was a humane thing to do.
And they come out to the base, or?
Oh, no, we never had any out at the base.
So in Dijon, the town center, you'd go in there? And...
Yeah, we had a club in Dijon that we frequented.
So the French women were impressed by American aviators, I take it?
Well, yeah, because we had candy and we had cigarettes and we had liquor. And they thought, I guess, we had all the money in the world. But I didn't mess around with those girls too much over there. But my little dog, where I got that dog was a nearby farmer, right next door. We had on our dining room table, which was a big 6-foot-long planks nailed together in a tent. And our cooks were really not gourmet cooks. They got peanut butter in a gallon, olive drab color gallon can, and orange marmalade, and butter in that container. and they would open and serve it by taking a cleaver and hitting it that way, turn that, hitting again, peel the corners back and set that on those planks. And it stayed there forever. So till the marmalade turned to sugar, and it's not very appetizing. Anyway, I had a gallon of that butter, and I traded it to that farmer for a dozen eggs and that little dog and a chicken. And the butter, I'm sure, was rancid anyway, but still he got the better deal. I was going to cook that chicken, so I put him in a bucket, put him on my little stove in there, and turned that 120 octane fuel under that, and got my buddies. I said, well, we're going to eat good tonight. We'll boil that chicken. And we started drinking cognac and boiling that chicken. About every half hour, I'd go stick a fork in it, and every time it got tougher and tougher. Well, finally, after 2 hours, that fork wouldn't go in that damn chicken. That was the toughest chicken. We ate K rations for supper that night. Couldn't eat that damn chicken.
What happened to the dog?
Oh, I kept the little dog, and great dog. And when we came home in about October, maybe, November, we went up to a train to Bremerhaven. I forgot the name of the city in France. And several guys had dogs. Of course, everybody wanted to bring them home. So I went to the flight surgeon. He gave me some sleeping pills. He said, just give her one of these and keep her quiet for a couple hours. So I guess he did that to all the boys who had dogs. We lined up to get on a Navy ship we're going to get on to come home, run by the U.S. Navy, transport. So we're all lined up there with our B-4 bag, yes, and a barracks bag here, and I got the dog in this bag. She's fast asleep. The fellow up ahead of me there has got a German Shepherd, big German in a bag like that. And the gangplank going up to the ship was just one person wide, and with two bags, you could hardly get through. Well, that old German Shepherd woke up and he got out of that bag, and the GI that owned him was afraid to claim him, afraid they'd jerk him off of the ship. You know, he couldn't go home, investigate or something. So he, not my dog, so he went on up the gangplank. Well, the dog sniffed around, and he finally tried to follow his master, and he couldn't get through for all this people on the gangplank, and there's an officer standing at the naval officer. Hey, you guys, stand aside there. Let that dog up. So everybody stood aside, and the dog went up and found his master. Well, I took my little dog down to the stateroom and tied her up underneath my bunk short enough that she couldn't stick her nose out even. And we weren't out of the harbor maybe an hour till the ship's captain came on the PA system. Now, all you fellows that brought dogs aboard, be in my cabin in 15 minutes. That's, oh God, I don't know if I should own up to it or not, but guess I better. So we went up there, and there were probably a dozen of us. And he said, now, he said, you brought those dogs on here, and I want you to have those dogs. So I'm going to assign a locker back on the fantail, and I'm going to assign a sailor to clean up, feed, and water the dogs. But all I ask of you that twice a day, you get out and walk your dogs on the deck for 15 minutes, twice a day. And when you get off the ship, I advise you to take them off the same way you brought them on, or they're going to confiscate them. And I'll never forget that captain doing that. So we did that, put our little dogs back in there in a place. And by God, he had a sailor back there, tending those dogs for the whole trip across the Atlantic. And we took them off the same way. I kept that little dog for a lot of years.
What was the name of your dog?
Madam, little French Madam. I was in San Antonio with her 2 years later, I guess, and I had to go away for a trip and left her with a friend who had a chain link fence. Frank would take care of her. Yeah. Well, I came back, and he said the first night that dog was gone. I said, oh, hell. I went to the dog pound. I put ads in the paper. Never saw my little dog again. And about a couple of 3 months something. I picked up the San Antonio Light newspaper. On the front page is a picture of a dog lying on her side with a kitten nursing her. But she had her head up like, and I said, hell, that's my dog. And had the people's name and address. I went to their house, middle of the afternoon. Nobody was home. When I knocked on the door, I heard that dog in there. I guess she could smell me or hear me or something, and she was having a fit to get out. The lady came home and opened the door, and that dog jumped and hit me right in the chest. And I had pictures of her and told the lady, and she said, well, yeah, okay. And then soon her little girl came home, about a 7 or 8 year old girl. And the mother told the girl that that was my dog, and I was there to get her and take her away. And the little girl started crying. I said, oh, God, I can't do that. I said, she got a good home. You're taking care of her. I said, just keep her here. Just take care of her. I left her there with those people.
Your sad day for you, huh?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I missed that little dog. She was a good one, though.
Did the girl know about the dog?
Oh, yeah. I told the mother and little girl about where the dog came from. For a gallon of rancid butter.
You ever wonder what happened finally with the dog? Did you ever?
Oh, yeah, but I'm sure they took good care of her. But I asked, I said, why that dog with a kitten? I said, well, they had a mother cat got run over. But she had left this little kitten. And somewhere or another, the kitten got with it, or the dog got with the kitten and started nursing that kitten. But she was kind of like that. When she'd get around a rabbit or something, she'd start, loving rabbits.
Not much a hunting dog, huh?
Oh, no. She was not a hunter. She was a lover. Yeah. And she slept with me in my sleeping bag. But she'd always get in and go all the way down to my feet, and that felt good. I liked her in there. And people could walk by the tent all night long. She'd sleep, but if it was a Frenchman, not an American, walk by, I don't know how she'd come out of there and go out there and bark at him. And then I'd go to sleep again. And then she'd come back in with her feet wet and her belly wet and go back down there in the sleeping bag again.